Hi everyone and welcome back to World of YOHIO. Today we're going to talk about why I moved to Japan. Let's get into it. So today I wanted to talk about why I moved to Japan. And there are of course several reasons. My career as a solo artist actually started in Japan and not Sweden, as many people tend to think. When I was 16 years old, back in 2012, I signed a deal with Universal Music Japan. It was a surreal thing for me and I couldn't really believe it at first, but it happened. I'd been playing guitar for my first band Serenity for some years already, and we had a couple of tours in Japan as well. So I wasn't new to the business, but signing with Universal was my first step to becoming a solo artist. I dropped out of school after graduating year 9. According to Swedish law, you have to go to school until 9th grade, and after that it's optional. So I decided not to continue going to school. I just thought that 3 more years would make no difference in my life, since I already knew what I wanted to do for a living. And I always hated school. So I was 15 years old when I decided not to continue my studies. Some professions require many years of school and a proper degree. However, there's no proper educational route for an artist. In the world of show business and entertainment, grades and degrees have no importance whatsoever. That you will learn pretty fast. What matters are your skills and your willingness to learn by doing. There's no other way. So the only thing that determines if you succeed or fail is your own effort, nothing else. You need to become so good and so interesting that they can't ignore you, and that is up to you. School can't teach you those things. You'll have to figure it out for yourself and just do your thing. So I was signed to Universal in Japan. They wanted a mini album, all in Japanese, and the deadline was very tight. I already spoke Japanese back then, but not near the level I'm at right now. Of course, I could have hired someone to write the lyrics for me, but that's not how I work as a person. I want to do everything myself, even if it's challenging, or should I say, especially if it's challenging. So I started writing songs. I didn't do anything else. From the moment I woke up until I was so exhausted and mentally drained that I fell asleep in the chair by the computer. They wanted 6 songs in Japanese. Back then, I had only written 1 Japanese song to see if I could do it, to challenge myself. That's my song Without Wings. And that's the song they heard me sing live at a Serenity show in Japan, which made them decide to sign me. I remember that I lived with my dad in Stockholm in those days. We went back and forth to my hometown Sundsvall every week. Since my dad worked at the record company both Serenity and I was signed to in Sweden at that time. The office and studio was back in Sundsvall. But I was so busy making music that I stayed in Stockholm by myself most of the time. I've had many stressful periods in my life since then, but I still consider the writing process of my debut mini album one of the worst to date. Mentally, it was terrible. I don't know how many times I deleted ideas and started from scratch. Countless days of anxiety and doubting my own abilities. Was this challenge too great for me? Did I really have what it takes? These thoughts bothered me every single day. I was close to giving up so many times. I hated myself for not being as good as I wanted to. I had many breakdowns during these months of constant work. I was a wreck. I barely slept and I lived off of instant noodles and coffee. I barely saw the sunlight. Well, not that there's much of that in Sweden during the winter anyways, but still I didn't go outside unless if I had to go to the store when I ran out of coffee. This was really one of the most challenging times of my life mentally, but still, amongst all of the self-doubt, anxiety, and hating myself, somehow I pushed through. It was tough. Oh God, it was tough, but I made it. After a month or 2 of constant struggle and battling myself, the constant self-critic, the 6 songs were done. During this process, I learned so much about myself. I also learned a lot of new Japanese, since I was forced to push myself to the other limits of my abilities to be able to write the lyrics. And in the end, I met the deadline. They were happy with the results, and I could finally breathe without my chest hurting from anxiety and stress. I had slayed the dragon, which was the critical voice in my head, the self-doubt and self-hate, the pressure of the deadline, and I came out victorious on the other side of the dungeon, finally able to see the light of day again. Sounds dramatic? Well, analogies can be powerful. I like to think of the struggles in life in this way. So now I had my songs done. Still, they were only in the demo stage at this point, so we went up to Sundsvall to do the real recording. Up until this point, I hadn't been singing that much. I was essentially a guitarist and songwriter. When I made demos for Serenity, I usually sang the vocal melody and then sent it to Seike to write the lyrics. I also did some of the backing vocals on the actual recordings. But I'd only sung one time in front of an audience. That's when Universal discovered me. So when I recorded the vocals for Reach the Sky, of course, that critical voice inside of my head started bothering me again. I wasn't happy with the results. I wasn't that used to hearing my own voice either. I really didn't like it at all. So the recording process, at least for the vocal part, was a stressful experience for me. I wasn't satisfied with my own performance. I wanted to be better. In the end, looking back on it 8 years later, it turned out fine. But I can really hear that my voice wasn't that developed yet, which isn't strange since I hadn't been singing for that long and I had just turned 16. In January of 2012, the mini album was done. The sense of accomplishment you get when a project like that is finally finished is hard to describe. It's truly surreal. Even now, after many albums and countless songs released, the moment all your hard work pays off and turns into a finished product always feels the same way. It's blissful and more rewarding than anything I know. That's what all the struggle and sleepless nights is all about. So now the moment came when we were finally able to go public with my solo debut. It was a great feeling to say the least. Now it was time for me to go to Japan for my first promotion trip for the release of the mini album. I went with my dad, since he worked at the Swedish label and was my manager back home. We were picked up at the airport by Universal and dropped off at our hotel. We were gonna stay for about 2 weeks. After we dropped off our stuff at the very nice hotel, we went straight to the Universal office to have a meeting and go over the schedule. And that schedule was packed. Every day, they would pick us up at the hotel at about 8 a.m. Then I would go straight into makeup and changing into my stage outfit. I was gonna be in character every single day. The days were really busy. I had countless interviews every single day, and the only break I had was a 30-minute lunch break. Everything was really hectic, and that office came to be my home for those 2 weeks. I can't lie and say that I wasn't extremely exhausted. After doing interviews with magazines, websites, and occasionally going outside of the office for photo shoots and radio shows, we usually came back to the hotel around 10 or 11 p.m., sometimes even later than that. So I barely slept more than 4 to 5 hours most days. I think I had one day off to actually go see friends and do something else while in Tokyo. Leading up to the release of the mini album, which was the 25th of April 2012, I went on 3 more promotion trips. I was going back and forth to Japan that whole spring. The later promotion trips involved a lot of TV appearances. I was on most of the big morning shows, one of them on which I played Sky Limit live with my backing band, the members from Japanese visual kei act Dual Jewel. I was still very new to interviews and TV and not really used to it yet. I also did 2 appearances on the most watched TV show in Japan, called Waratte Itomo, which had been going on for 30 years. I think it had around 12 million viewers every single day. Being able to appear on that show is a huge thing in Japan, and it's not easy to get there. All of my favorite Japanese artists have been on that show, so it was a really cool experience. They actually told me that Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga had been on the show once. I was on it twice in a span of 2 months. Not to brag or anything. I don't know if it's true, but I thought it was kind of cool anyways. But seriously speaking, I was scared to death doing that show. As I said, I didn't have that much experience appearing on TV. And as many of you know, Japanese TV shows can be a bit eccentric and over the top. In Sweden, we usually have 1 or 2 hosts running the show. I think there were like 15 people on at the same time on Warati Itomo. A whole panel of comedians and people running around, everybody talking at the same time. Why I was so nervous was because I didn't really get any guidelines for what I was supposed to do. And it was live, in front of 12 million people. If that doesn't make you nervous, well, then I don't know what does. I mean, I was a 16-year-old Swede being thrown into a situation I had no idea what to do with, in a language I was still learning. It truly was scary. It all went well in the end though, and I got through it without dying. It was a fun experience anyways, and after doing a lot more of TV from that point, I got used to it. Now being on TV isn't something I get nervous about at all. I still remember the feeling though. After the release of the mini album, I came back again in August, playing some shows. Amongst them were a huge festival called Summer Sonic. After coming back to Sweden, my story had reached the Swedish media, and one of the biggest newspapers interviewed me for a 2-page article. After that article was out, madness broke out in the office. That same day, the company phone didn't stop ringing until late at night. It was hysteric, and there were so many requests that we couldn't accept all of them. We had to choose which ones were most important. One of the biggest things that happened then was that I got booked on a Swedish-Norwegian show called Skavlan. It's the biggest talk show in Scandinavia, and they have everything from prime ministers to Hollywood actors on as their guests. To put it in other words, it's a big deal, and it's not easy to get on there as a guest. So I was invited and I went to do the interview. By now, I had turned 17. This was the fall of 2012. The interview went well, and from that moment, the phone didn't ring any less. Since I got so much media coverage in Sweden, we decided to release a single in English. This was my song, Our Story. I originally wrote it in Japanese, so I had to translate it into English and record a new version. After the interview aired, I got invited to participate in the Swedish outtakes for a Eurovision Song Contest called Melodifestivalen. This is a Swedish tradition, and acts like ABBA won back in the days. Everybody watches it, every year, me included of course. So being invited was very cool. I accepted after thinking about it for a while. I had my doubts since I didn't think the Swedish population was ready for something so unusual. Sweden can be very stuck up and close-minded when it comes to those things. So I went into it just for fun. I never thought it would work, but I wanted to make it as good as possible anyways. The first semi-final, when I was backstage with my support band members waiting to be called on stage, I looked at them and we just laughed and said, well, all or nothing, here it goes. Out of the 10 acts that night, we got the most votes and went straight to the finals. It was unbelievable. I was shocked, truly. I never thought it would work, but it sure did. Overnight, everybody in Sweden knew who I were. From 5-year-old children to 70-year-old grandmas. I still remember how weird it felt. I couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. It was uncomfortable at first. Very uncomfortable. When I'm not on stage, I like to be alone and not be seen. This was the end of that. Fame sure has its ups and downs. Then came the finals, and I came in second place. I actually had 100,000 more votes than my good friend who won it all. But the European jury didn't like me, and the point system, at least back then in 2013, was that Swedish people and the jury had 50-50 power. So I came in second, but my career really took off. I went on signing tours all over Sweden, almost 60 cities in a month, and played at festivals during the summer. I was constantly away from home and I did TV and radio regularly. It was a very hectic part of my life, but also an important one. I love being on the road and just doing what I do. But this episode is called Why I Moved to Japan, right? So let me get back to that. Why I told you all of this is to give you some background. This is what I was doing, and I was active in Sweden for about 3.5 years, constantly working. But I never planned to be an artist in Sweden. That was never what I really wanted to do. My solo career started in Japan, but shortly after debuting over there, all of this happened in Sweden. I went back to Japan whenever I got the chance, and I released my first solo album in Japan in 2013. The same as in Sweden, but lyrically all in Japanese instead of English. However, I was always busy in Sweden. And yes, I did like it. It was a crazy ride and I accomplished most of my goals and more back home. But it wasn't my dream. Some people get angry with me when I talk about this. They say that I'm ungrateful and spoiled. I would beg to differ. I will always be grateful for everything that happened in Sweden. I will always be thankful for all the help I got and everyone that worked so hard for me. But I also worked hard. If I didn't work as hard as I did, I wouldn't have gotten to that point at all. It was never easy. People that think it is should try to live an artist's life for a while. It's just not easy. I went into depression several times during this period of my life. Mind you, I was only 17 when all the big stuff started to happen in Sweden, and only 16 when it happened in Japan. I was a child, to be honest. A hard-working child at that, but still a child. It can be hard to cope with all those things at such a young age. And at the end, I realized more and more that 3 years had gone by. I wasn't where I wanted to be. It wasn't my dream. My dream was to work as an artist in Japan, not Sweden. So even if I'm grateful for everything that happened and everything I was able to experience and achieve in my home country, I didn't feel at home. So many people around me told me I was crazy when I said I wanted to work in Japan instead. Everything's going so good for you here, why leave? Well, Japan has always been my destination. Since the first time I set foot in this country, I've always known that it's here I want to live. Not only because of what I do for work, but because I feel at home here. I feel at home in this culture. This place is more me than Sweden, in so many ways. And it can be hard to describe, but it's true. It's mostly just a feeling, but I know that I feel the most at ease and at home when I'm in Tokyo. I love Sweden as well, and I love going there to visit my family and friends. But there's emphasis on visit. I don't want to live there. I didn't care if it was going to be a struggle for me to continue my activities in Japan. I didn't feel happy in Sweden. That was it. It's never been about money or where I can find the most work. I know where I want to be. I know who I want to become. That's the only thing that matters to me. I want to fight for the dreams that I have, and they are more important than anything. It's my purpose. And when I'm not following my true purpose, it hurts. I just know when I'm on the wrong track. The easy way is never the way to greatness in life. From 2015 to the start of summer 2016, I played the prince in a musical production of Snow White for 6 months. We toured all over Sweden and it was a great experience. I'd never starred in a musical before, so everything was quite new to me. But after months of rehearsals and 98 shows, it started to come naturally. It was great fun and I loved working with my co-actors and the ensemble. After the musical tour was finished, in June of 2016, I finally saw my chance. I had no more jobs booked in Sweden yet, so I decided to pack my bags and go to Japan. So here I am, after another 3 years of hardship and struggle going back and forth between Sweden and Japan. And now I live in Tokyo. This year is my comeback year, finally. There's been so much going on these 3 years after I packed my bags and decided to move. Moving to another country isn't an easy process. And that's maybe a whole other episode for another time. But I am here now, and this is just the beginning. Never stop chasing your dreams and don't let anyone tell you it's impossible, because it is possible. You just have to learn to never give up, ever. Don't let anyone or anything dictate your life. It is yours, and you do what you want with it. So do something that matters to you, and don't wait for a better time. The better time is always now. And just to make things clear, just because I want to live in Japan and have my base here, it doesn't mean that I don't want to be active in other countries as well. I'm thrilled to tour the world in the future. I really am. There are so many places I want to visit, but you have to have somewhere you call home. And for me, that's Tokyo. So there you have it. This went a bit longer than I planned for, but I felt like telling you some background as to why I feel like I do and everything that led up to me moving here. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of World of YOHIO. This was kind of a personal one for me, but I hope you learned something and I hope you found it interesting. If you want to stay updated, you can follow me on Instagram at YOHIO or Twitter at YOHIO_thisrain. And if you want to support my work even further, you can check out my Patreon at patreon.com/YOHIO. That's all for this time, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.